I think you're going there.
Am I here? Hello, Ragy. Before we get into talking about consumers and what impacts their purchase decisions, I want to kick things off by asking you a question that is probably on everyone's mind here in this room, which is that you've been in some of the most amazing sort of hot startups, unicorns, and you've had a successful IPO. How did you do it? What were some of the lessons you learned, and what was exciting about it?
Yeah, so having been through the journey many times, what I would say to anyone who's starting a company is just focus on fundamentals. And it's very tempting to look at markets and valuations and pundit opinions and ignore the fundamentals. And for me, there are only three fundamental things about creating a business. The first one is, are you solving a real problem for your customers? Something that is a must-have, something that increases their revenue, reduces their costs, or help them manage risk. Those are the three business fundamentals that you can't deviate from. So rule number one is to do something that does one of those three things. Rule number two for me is take amazing care of your customers. Take good care of them. Make sure that they're happy. And there's no substitute, because in today's connected world, it's not what you say, it's what your customers say to each other that matters. You walk around the conference here, you see a lot of ads, and some of them you look at it and go, that makes no sense. Because you know 500 people that are using that product and know it's a terrible product. So it's kind of embarrassing to say something that doesn't jive with what the product really does, because customers know from each other how good you are. So the third thing, any guess on the third thing? Solve a real problem, take amazingly good care of your customers. And the third one, I always say, there are three rules, and I say the third one is there is no rule three. There isn't a third one. I say that so that you never forget there are only two things you have to do to create a good business.
That is a good way to remember those two rules. Moving on to the story of Sprinklr, could you give us a short introduction about the company?
Yeah, so we are a customer experience management platform for large global businesses. So we work with, if you look at the Forbes list of the biggest companies in the world, we work with 9 of the top 10. And what we do for them is provide a unified platform that allows them to do all customer-facing functions, so marketing, advertising, customer care, customer feedback management, sales and engagement across 36 digital channels. So many of the social and messaging channels. And you know, consumers are moving from using the phone to using one of these newer channels to talk to each other and to talk to brands. So if you want to do customer care on WhatsApp or WeChat or Facebook Messenger, or if you want to do conversational commerce, or if you want to run advertising on TikTok, then you would use Sprinklr's platform to do so.
That's interesting. Would you say, you know, these non-sort of traditional channels like social media you mentioned, is data different? Customer data different?
It's very, very different. So if you look at most large companies today, their customer-facing infrastructure is based on their CRM system. And their CRM system typically has transactional data. What did you buy? When did you stay at my hotel? And it has got very limited information beyond that. Now, companies are trying to solve it by creating what they call a CDPs, customer data platforms, and they're bringing behavioral data. So did you come to the website? Did you open an email? And they're trying to append that with what did you buy? When you look at today's world, that is very sparse information. It doesn't tell you a lot about who Angela is. If I take 30 seconds and I look you up online, now, in your case, there's a ton of information, but I could look any one of you online, and I probably can find out where you work, I can find out every job you've had, I can find out when you graduated, what did you study, everybody you know. If your Facebook profile is public, I can probably see what your family looks like. I can see, by going through your Twitter feed, I can probably predict which way you'll vote. I can tell you the 5 things that matter to you this year. I can tell you the conferences you've attended, and if you're on Reddit, if you're on blogs or forums, if you have written reviews, it reveals so much about what matters to you. So if I'm Coca-Cola, or if I'm Pepsi, or if I'm Marriott, or if I'm P&G, the data that consumers, all of us, are putting out about ourselves is probably 1,000 times bigger and fresher than the data I have about you. And so you can't use that information like you use CRM data, because this is owned by you, the consumer, and it's governed by the rules that, say, Twitter puts on it. But we give you the right way to get insights and the right way to use that in a GDPR compliant, California privacy compliant, consumer first kind of way. Does that make sense?
It does. And this is sort of in line with what you and I kind of talked about during one of our prep calls. You said that there are more data points available out there than the stars that you can count in the sky. Do you think companies are doing enough with those data to enhance customer experience, or do they have a lot of catching up to do?
I believe there's a lot of catching up to do, and it's really not anybody's fault. When you look at all publicly available data, it's almost always unstructured. It's photos, it's videos, it's text in over 100 languages. So you can have that petabyte of data, but you wouldn't know how to use it. It's not like a human being can go through it like you do in your feed on Facebook or Twitter. So I would say up until 5 years ago, it was largely useless because the technology to harness it wasn't there. Today, though, with artificial intelligence, you really can understand what do people mean. You can read images. You can analyze and get a trend of how your brand is perceived. You can get the 5 things that people don't like about your product and the 5 things they like about your competitors. And you can feed that to the product team. You can look at, before your CEO speaks on a topic like Ukraine, you can analyze how his counterparts, what they said and how the market reacted to it from the voice of the citizen, voice of the customer. Governments can use that to provide better governance. WHO, World Health Organization, used Sprinklr during the COVID time, and we were just privileged to be of service to them. And it's the concept of understanding intent and then using that to create better experiences. And we've got a long way to go. Our customers, which are larger companies, are really beginning to invest heavily in it.
You mentioned the AI models, and I want to get to Sprinklr's AI models a bit later, but I want to ask you about personalization. We all know that personalization is very important in customer experience. But in your opinion, what is the most important factor in personalizing customer experience?
So I'm staying at Hotel X here. So when I walk up to the lobby, I'm sure the person on the other side of the reception desk would treat me differently if I showed up with 3 kids and 20 bags than me just walking in, you know. And they look at me to decide what to say and what's relevant, right? I have a bag, they might say, how was your flight? So this whole idea of listening and looking at someone else to understand who they are, what matters to them, I think has to be the foundation of personalization going forward. And most companies are just still stuck in the past where they think they're personalizing because they put your first name into an email and looked at the last 2 things you bought and suggested something else. And I think that's just so first generation.
Speaking of AR that you mentioned previously just now, let's talk about the role of AI in customer experience. There's a lot of chatter about metaverse, AI, VR, and they sort of almost become a new wave. But there are a lot of skeptics out there as well. What are your thoughts?
So, I mean, how many of you have used Oculus from Facebook? Just show of hands. So if you've used it, you know the devices are going to get better. You know the experience, you can see the future. So I know there's a lot of naysayers today, but for one, I think there's a whole next generation of internet that's going to be powered by AR and VR. And you can call it metaverse, you can call it whatever you want, but I think it's going to dramatically change how we communicate. And when I say it's going to dramatically change, let me kind of put that in context. It's not that we're going to do anything different. We might do something different, but for starters, look, if I don't know you, I'm going to probably just send you an email, right? If I know you slightly better, I might text you. If I know you slightly better, I might call you. If I know you slightly better, I might video call you. And then if we really want to meet each other, we meet in person. I think what we're going to get is one form of communication that's between a video call and real human meeting. And because in AR and VR, we can eventually bend the laws of physics and gravity and totally do away with time and space. So I think that world is going to expand to eat into how we communicate. And if you take a 5, 10, 15-year view into what it can be, I think you'll agree with me that there's a lot of opportunities.
Speaking of Sprinklr's AI models, you have AI models that run in 100 different data points in 100 different languages. Can you tell us a little bit about how that works and how companies are sort of leveraging on using Sprinklr's AI models?
So as I mentioned, one of the product suites that we offer is our customer research or feedback management. So we're reading everything that's public and we're using AI to understand what is going on. So let me give you a couple of solutions, real world examples. So airlines, for example, use that data to understand whether someone's talking about a threat. So if you use the word explosives or bombs or guns and mention that in the context of flying, it's not a good thing, right? You don't want to be talking about that while you're at the airport. And then they're looking for any mentions that also reflect their brand or one of their flights. And using AI, then they've got models that alert them when they find something suspicious. That's pretty much like what we do in physical world, but doing that in a digital world. And those are the kind of things that were practically not possible without AI. I'll give you another example. We have a lot of large regulated companies who understand the sentiment of consumers at the country level to decide on their policies. And so they look at which way the regulators are likely to vote and who's influencing like the country in terms of whether it's electric cars or solar or anything that matters. And if you're a large conglomerate and you're number one and number two, you're a monopoly, you just really have to understand where the consumer is at and what they are thinking. And if you are flat-footed, it's going to be too late.
I want to pivot and go back to talking a little bit about startups and fundraising. You mentioned that Sprinklr is your 4th startup, and you also mentioned to me before that you almost have a curse of starting a startup right after recessions. You started one in 2009, right after the dot-com bubble, and Sprinklr was in 2009, right after the financial crisis. What can you tell us about starting a company? Obviously now is, with the markets sort of going into a downturn, and we have fears of recession, inflation, again, economic downturn. What can you tell us about starting a company in this sort of crisis mode?
Look, I'm a fan of starting companies when everyone's scared. And that's primarily because it's easier to hire people. When everything is hunky-dory, like in the dot-com time, or frankly, like in the last few years, everyone is exuberant and everyone thinks, they're trying to find the next hot thing. Look, there are finite games and there are infinite games, right? It's not, most people go, well, what do I do to succeed? And I go, in what period? If you want to be successful today, just today, versus you want to be successful this week, versus if you want to be successful this year, versus if you want to be successful in the next 10 years, versus you just want to be successful, all of these are very different criteria that leads to very different rules of the game. For me, there is no, personally, I don't look at it in a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5-year period. So market downturns are times when there's uncertainty, there is easier access to resources. And so if you are building a business that's just focused on fundamentals like I always believe in, then it doesn't matter when you start. It's like, when's the best time to buy a house? When the price is high, price is low? It doesn't matter, you're going to live in it. Mm-hmm. So if you're looking to buy a house and if you want to raise your family in it, every day is just as good as any other day.
But wouldn't you say it would be kind of challenging for the fundraising aspect?
Yeah, I'm not a fan of celebrating fundraising. Look, if you believe in your idea, if you know you're going to be successful, fundraising is a way you're letting someone else benefit from your work. End of the day, it's your team that's going to go to work every day, create something out of nothing, and you're letting an investor in. Mm-hmm. So I will almost encourage you to put a lot of energy into your business, into understanding your customers, taking care of them. In the last 100 days or so, I probably met over 100 of my customers face to face. And when you're armed with that truth, like, you're not going to be shaken by what an analyst says or a pundit says or an investor says, because they're trying to look at lagging metrics. If you guys not familiar with it, I would encourage you to read a book called 4DX, 4 Disciplines of Execution, and learn about leading and lagging indicators. Your success is a lagging indicator that they're looking to give you money. You have to be confident by looking at your leading indicators, because your leading indicators are what necessarily drives your lagging indicators. And so, try to be as fundamentals driven as you can. There's only one source of truth when you're building a business. It's not what people are excited about. It's not what the trend is. It's not whether your product is cute. It's what customers are willing to pay for. Not what they're excited about. There's a lot of excitement you can get. It's only one truth. It's what customers are willing to pay for. If you can't find someone to pay for your stuff, maybe your idea is not just as good as you think it is.
How is Sprinklr sort of bracing for a market downturn? You're a listed company. What have you been telling sort of the investors on conference calls?
So I'm coming off earnings week. We posted 32% subscription growth. We were free cash flow positive, which surprised a whole bunch of analysts. We're focused on the fundamentals. We're on the right side of history. We help businesses get more revenue. We help businesses save costs, make customers happier, see around the corner, predict and mitigate risk. And so if you're looking at Sprinklr through the lens of the next 3 months, 6 months, you're probably not a great investor for Sprinklr. If you look at it through the lens of the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years, there's an opportunity to create a company that could come after the big 3 or 4 companies that are there now. And our stated ambition is not to create the biggest company in the world. It's to create the most loved enterprise software company in the world. Why wouldn't you want to bet on that?
Ragy, what lies ahead of you? What's in the future for you and Sprinklr in the next 3 to 5 years?
Blue skies, sunny and 72. No, I think what lies ahead is an opportunity to create what comes after CRM. It's an opportunity to create an operating system for the digital edge of your brand. What is a digital edge, you might ask? It's where your customer meets you when you run an ad. If you're a car company, your dealers answering the phone or responding to a text. It's where your brand is created. It's where the risk is. It's where the opportunity is. It's where your costs are. It's where you can understand what customers like and don't like. And so we're building an operating system for that. We call it Unified Customer Experience